Most people think the future is something that happens to us. We imagine tomorrow as the inevitable result of technological progress, economic trends, or historical momentum. But what if the future isn't something we discover? What if it's something our institutions, technologies, and incentives are quietly optimizing every day? If that's true, then the most important question isn't whether the future will be good or bad. It's who or what is deciding what our future is designed to optimize. Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world. Today's episode explores A Future So Bright by Kate O'Neill. This is not a book review. This is a systems-level analysis of how human values become embedded within technological, economic, and institutional systems that increasingly shape the future.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have this deeply ingrained habit, I think, of treating the future like it's the weather.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. We just watched the forecast.
Exactly. We look at the forecast, climate crises or the deployment of intelligent automation, these massive geopolitical shifts.
The algorithm serving up misinformation.
Right. And we just sort of buy an umbrella and brace for impact. We passively predict. But the underlying argument in Kate O'Neill's work fundamentally rejects that passivity.
Completely.
The premise here for you listening is that these overlapping exponential forces, what she calls these change factors, they're not meteorological events. They're the outputs of designed systems. And if we want to actually survive them, we have to transition from being prognosticators to being architects.
Yeah, and that transition, it actually requires a complete overhaul of our default vocabulary for tomorrow. Because currently, society operates through this incredibly restrictive, almost paralyzing lens.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, if you prompt someone right now to envision the future of human civilization 50 years from now, their brain almost instantly snaps to one of two rigid extremes. It's either dystopia or utopia.
Yeah, it's totally the Mad Max versus Jetsons binary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We either picture this scorched earth, resource-starved wasteland where humanity is fighting over the last drops of water, or we picture this frictionless, hyper-green, effortless paradise where technology has just magically solved every conceivable human struggle.
But why do we do that? It seems like such a massive cognitive failure that we can only imagine the absolute worst or the absolute best with zero gradient in between.
Well, part of it is just an evolutionary cognitive quirk. Yeah. The human brain is a prediction engine, right? It's designed to categorize threats and safe zones.
Sure.
Ambiguity requires massive computational energy for our brains, whereas binary categories like safe or dangerous, perfect or ruined, they're cognitively cheap.
That makes sense.
But on a sociological level, that binary is actively destructive because utopia is, by definition, a non-place. Perfection is impossible in systems involving human entropy.
Right, humans are messy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we dismiss utopia as a naive fantasy, which we inevitably do, we are left holding only dystopia.
Wow.
And that breeds a profound systemic despair. If you actually believe collapse is the only realistic trajectory, you stop investing in the structural integrity of your current institutions. You stop designing for a better tomorrow because you believe the blueprint is already burning.
Which introduces the core mechanism O'Neill uses to kind of break that paralysis in this deep dive. She frames it as a very specific equation. Optimism plus strategy equals a bright future.
Right, strategic optimism.
Exactly. She labels this strategic optimism. And I want to pause here because the word optimism carries a ton of cultural baggage, especially for you listeners who might be in corporate or highly technical circles.
Oh, yeah. It's almost a dirty word.
It is. Optimism is practically a synonym for delusion in those spaces. It gets conflated with the law of attraction or the idea that if you just manifest positive vibes, your supply chain will magically fix itself.
What's fascinating here is how often the inverse is treated as intellectual superiority.
Yes. Say more about that.
Well, pessimism is frequently masked as being strategic or being a realist. Like you sit in a boardroom, you present a catastrophically pessimistic outlook, and people nod along, assuming you've done the hard analytical work.
Right. They think you're the smart one in the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But pessimism isn't a strategy at all. Pessimism is an abdication of responsibility. It simply accepts the worst-case scenario as a foregone conclusion. It demands absolutely zero creative engineering from you.
That is such a good point.
Whereas strategic optimism is a rigorous structural commitment. It requires you to boldly and meticulously audit the gravest risks. You look directly at the math of the climate crisis or the trajectory of algorithmic bias, but then you obligate yourself to architect systems that force the best possible outcomes. Optimism is the ethical obligation to actually do the work.
I look at it a lot like, well, like the routing algorithm in a GPS navigation system.
Okay, yeah.
Like, if I am just blindly optimistic and I'm like, I'm going to the beach and nothing will stop me and I ignore the map, I'm probably going to drive my car straight off a collapsed bridge.
Right. Optimism without strategy is just a car crash.
Exactly. Optimism is simply inputting the destination. You have to tell the system where you want to go. The strategy is the GPS software dynamically calculating the traffic density, the road closures, the hazards in real time. It doesn't pretend the collapsed bridge doesn't exist.
It routes around it.
Yes. It processes the reality of the obstacle and mathematically routes you around it to maintain the trajectory toward that destination.
That GPS analogy perfectly illustrates the difference between intention and mechanism. And to actually build that routing algorithm for society, O'Neill argues we have to leverage what she calls human superpowers, specifically our capacity for both-and thinking.
Both-and thinking, right?
Yeah, which is the cognitive flexibility to hold conflicting paradoxical truths simultaneously without forcing them into an either resolution. Because our systems are incredibly complex, and reductive thinking is exactly what drives us off that cliff you mentioned.
Let's ground that for everyone. So a both-and reality in the tech sector would be acknowledging that a massive language model can revolutionize medical diagnostics, democratize legal advice, and scale human connection,
That's the good stuff.
while simultaneously acknowledging that the exact same architecture can be weaponized to generate undetectable phishing campaigns, enforce surveillance, and automate bias at a terrifying scale.
Exactly. You don't have to choose whether AI is inherently good or evil. It is a lever.
It's a lever, and understanding the length of that lever brings us to Amara's Law, coined by the futurist Roy Amara.
Oh, I love Amara's Law.
It's so relevant right now. It dictates that human beings reliably overestimate the impact of a technology in the short run and vastly underestimate its impact in the long run.
Yeah.
Like, we panic that a new generative AI is going to replace every single copywriter by next Tuesday.
Right. Overestimating the short-term disruption.
Exactly. But we completely fail to strategically plan for how that same AI, over, say, 30 years, might fundamentally, permanently alter the legal definition of intellectual property, or the concept of truth in media, or the psychological development of children who grow up conversing with machines.
We miss the systemic, long-term tectonic shift because we are totally distracted by the short-term novelty.
So what does this all mean? If strategic optimism is about intentionally setting our destination, we have to wake up to a very uncomfortable reality, which is that the vehicles we are currently driving toward that horizon, our digital infrastructure, our corporate incentives, our social platforms, they're mostly on autopilot.
Yeah.
And they are optimizing for targets that have absolutely nothing to do with human flourishing.
This is the critical pivot in how we understand system design. There is a persistent myth in Silicon Valley, and beyond really, that technology is a neutral tool.
Right. The idea that tech is just a hammer.
Exactly. That an algorithm is just math, and math is objective.
Yeah.
That is categorically false. Every algorithm, every database schema, every corporate quarterly target optimizes for a specific set of human values.
Right.
Usually, those values are raw engagement, behavioral predictability, or margin expansion.
Let's look at the mechanics of how that actually touches you, the listener. Every single day, your human experience is quantified. How long your thumb hovers over a video on your screen, the geographic coordinates of where you walk with your phone, the exact phrasing of your emails.
It's all data.
All of it is abstracted into data points. Those data points are ingested by machine learning models that are strictly programmed to optimize for those corporate targets you mentioned. The models then alter your feed, your credit score, or your job prospects to better hit their targets.
It's relentless.
It is a continuous, invisible feedback loop where your past behavior is used to literally constrain your future experience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we start to see the cultural implications of that feedback loop. O'Neill articulates this brilliantly in the text. She says, experience at scale changes culture. Because experience at scale is culture.
A huge point.
Right. If 1 billion people are interacting daily with a digital infrastructure that prioritizes frictionless efficiency and enraging engagement over nuance and meaning, we are literally terraforming human culture to be colder, more reactive, and structurally unjust.
Yeah. There is a famous axiom from Bill Gates that illustrates the scaling effect really well. He noted that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency, but automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency.
Yeah.
O'Neill takes that systems level logic and applies it to human values. She points out that automation applied to meaning will magnify meaning, but automation applied to an unjust society will simply magnify the injustice. It's an amplifier. It's a massive amplifier. And we have glaring mathematically proven examples of this amplification from the research. Look at the architecture of Amazon's scrapped AI recruiting tool.
Oh, this is such a wild case study.
It really is. The intention, the optimism, if you will, was to build an objective, highly efficient system to vet the mountains of resumes they receive every day. To do this, they trained a machine learning model using their own historical hiring data over a 10-year period.
Right.
But here's the mechanical failure. Because the tech industry, and Amazon specifically, had historically hired predominantly men for technical roles, the training data was overwhelmingly male.
I want to break down exactly how the machine processed that for the listener, because it wasn't like it was explicitly programmed by some evil engineer to be sexist.
No, not at all. It's about vector mathematics. The algorithm maps words in a multi-dimensional space to find correlations with success. It looked at the resumes of successful hires and just noticed patterns. It realized that resumes containing words like women's, as in like captain of the women's chess club, or mentioning specific all-women's colleges, statistically correlated with people who were not hired in the past.
Because of the human bias in the historical data.
Exactly. So the algorithm mathematically penalized those resumes. It downgraded female applicants not out of malice, but because it was optimizing for historical consistency.
The machine did exactly what it was designed to do. It found a pattern in the data and optimized for it. It encoded human bias into an impenetrable, supposedly objective mathematical formula.
Yeah.
And we see the exact same feedback loop in predictive policing algorithms. If a municipality trains its crime prediction software on decades of arrest records, and those records are skewed by a history of over-policing specific minority neighborhoods.
Right. The algorithm ingests that bias as ground truth data. Right. And then the system predicts a higher probability of future crime in those exact same neighborhoods. So police departments allocate more patrols there.
Because the computer told them to.
Yeah, and because there are more police there, they inevitably catch more low-level infractions, which generates more arrest data for that zip code, which is then fed back into the algorithm to prove that the system was right all along.
It's a self-fulfilling statistical loop.
It really is. It just launders systemic prejudice through the shiny veneer of data science.
And even if we step away from those catastrophic institutional failures, we see the degradation of human-centric design in our daily, totally mundane interactions. O'Neill refers to this as the scaling of absurdity. Consider the mechanics of the CAP-TCA system, those I am not a robot checkboxes.
Oh my gosh, that is the perfect example of system inversion. Initially, Recap TCHA had us typing in distorted words from old books, right?
Yeah.
We were literally acting as free optical character recognition software to digitize the archives of the New York Times and Google Books.
Yep.
Then it evolved to clicking on traffic lights and crosswalks and bicycles. We were, and still are, providing millions of hours of free, micro-targeted labor to train the computer vision models for autonomous vehicles.
It is the pinnacle of absurdity. We are constantly forced to prove our humanity to machines by performing rote, mechanical tasks to make the machines smarter, just so we can access our own bank accounts.
It's wild when you say it like that.
It is. It is a system optimized entirely for the machine's learning requirements, not the human's user experience. If we do not actively intervene in these design philosophies, the promise of automation freeing us from drudgery will completely fail. We won't be freed up for deeper meaning. We will just be tasked with servicing the absurd administrative needs of the automated systems.
Which begs the question, how do we intervene? If our current digital architecture is creating these massive filter bubbles, optimizing for what triggers our lizard brain reflexes and dragging society down to its most reactive baseline, how do we build systems that actually pull us upward?
This is where we need a new framework.
Right, and this is where O'Neill introduces a design framework she calls Brighter. Now, I'm not going to walk through the entire 8-letter acronym here because that gets a little tedious for a conversation, but the framework is essentially a mandate to shift our optimization targets. And the two pillars of this that I really want to drill into are the R and the I.
Yeah, those are crucial. The R stands for recognizing what matters. At a systems level, O'Neill argues that the core metric of human existence is meaning,
Meaning.
Yes, we are meaning-making creatures. We do not just consume calories and output labor. We need narrative, purpose, and significance.
Yeah.
If a system strips meaning away in the pursuit of pure frictionless efficiency, it becomes toxic to the human operator.
And she translates this directly into the corporate sphere, which I think is so smart. In a business context, meaning takes the shape of purpose. And we have
Right.
to rescue that word from the marketing departments.
Please.
Like, purpose isn't a tagline you put on a tote bag or a coffee mug. Purpose is the structural reason an organization exists to solve a specific human problem at scale.
Which flows seamlessly into the I in Brighter. Identify what is going to matter. This is a complete redefinition of innovation. We traditionally view innovation as purely technical, a faster microchip, a lighter battery, a more compressed file format.
Right.
But viewed through a human-centric systems lens, innovation is the ability to anticipate what humans will find meaningful and necessary as their environments change, and engineering the infrastructure to provide it.
This completely upends how we evaluate organizational skills, like empathy, resilience, curiosity. These are almost universally dismissed in corporate environments as soft skills.
Right. They belong in HR, not engineering.
Exactly. But under this framework, empathy isn't a personality trait. It is a critical system design principle. If the engineers building an AI lack the structural empathy to imagine how their model might penalize marginalized groups, they build a defective product. The lack of a soft skill results in a hard system failure.
You cannot execute a successful digital transformation if your system design contradicts your organizational purpose. If a logistics company claims its purpose is to empower its frontline workers, but then deploys wearable technology that tracks their bathroom, breaks down to the second, and penalizes them algorithmically.
The system is actively destroying the purpose.
Exactly. The technology must physically manifest the values.
The book offers this brilliant, localized example of designing for meaning. The free store concept, specifically one in Hell's Kitchen, New York. On the surface, it's just a mutual aid tent on a sidewalk, right? People drop off gently used coats or blenders they don't need, and neighbors take what they can use.
But look at the underlying mechanics of that ecosystem. From an efficiency standpoint, it solves a basic physiological and logistical problem. It redistributes excess resources, prevents landfill waste, and supplies basic household needs to people with limited capital. And it operates with almost zero overhead.
But the genius of the system design is that it optimizes for psychological meaning simultaneously. By completely removing the transactional element of money, it removes the hierarchy of charity. It becomes an engine for communal dignity and agency.
You aren't a donor or a recipient.
Right. You are simply a neighbor participating in a circular economy. The system fulfills the human need for connection and significance just as effectively as it distributes blenders.
It's beautiful.
It is, but I do want to push back on this, though, on behalf of the executives listening.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because the free store is a beautiful concept, but it's a localized mutual aid project. How does a multinational corporation adopt this? Imagine you're sitting in a boardroom. Your compensation and your shareholders' returns are tied directly to quarterly earnings, margin expansion, and measurable efficiency. How do you pitch the board that the company needs to optimize for meaning?
It's tough.
Right. Efficiency is quantifiable on a spreadsheet instantly. Meaning is subjective, intangible, and messy. If I'm a CEO, how do I not get fired for prioritizing meaning over margin?
It is the central friction of modern capitalism, without a doubt.
Well,
But the defense of meaning relies on expanding the time horizon and recalculating the true cost of externalities. Fundamentally, an economy is just a mechanism for solving human problems.
okay.
When a corporation relentlessly optimizes for short-term profit extraction, say, by automating away a third of its workforce without a transition plan, or strip mining a community's resources, it doesn't actually eliminate costs. It just transfers them off its balance sheet and onto society. It creates negative externalities.
Like pollution or mass unemployment, which governments and communities then literally have to pay for.
Exactly. And leaders like Paul Pullman, the former CEO of Unilever, have been really vocal about the mathematical reality of this. A business that is fundamentally out of sync with the health of society is on a terminal trajectory. You cannot run a healthy business in a collapsing ecosystem. Eventually, the negative externalities you create will destroy your own consumer base, your supply chain, or invite massive regulatory crackdowns. Optimizing for meaning, for purpose, for long-term stakeholder health is not charity. It is risk mitigation. It ensures the ecosystem your business relies on remains viable for the next 50 years. not just the next quarter.
That distinction between short-term extraction and long-term viability brings us to one of the most intense change factors we face: the automation of human labor. There is a massive disconnect in how this is discussed right now. O'Neill draws a sharp line between the future of work and the future of jobs.
Yeah, that distinction is vital. When you read white papers or listen to executive panels discuss the future of work, they are almost exclusively utilizing an institutional lens. They're debating hybrid schedules, real estate footprints, asynchronous collaboration tools, and productivity tracking.
It's all structural.
Right.
But when an individual citizen Googles the future of jobs, they aren't worried about asynchronous Slack channels. They are operating from a place of existential dread. They want to know, is a large language model going to make my degree obsolete? Will a robotic fulfillment system mean I can't pay my mortgage next year? It is a deeply personal fear about survival and relevance.
To dismantle that fear, we have to look closely at the mechanics of what automation actually does. The narrative is often wholesale replacement-like. A robot sits at your desk and does your entire job.
Which is terrifying.
But the reality is augmentation. We need to separate a job from the discrete tasks that make up that job. Automation is incredibly effective at eliminating repetitive, discrete tasks, data entry, basic pattern recognition, physical sorting, but very few human roles are just a series of isolated tasks.
Like a nurse, for example. A nurse doesn't just check vitals and distribute medication. A machine can track blood pressure perfectly. But a machine cannot size up the emotional state of a terrified patient, understand the complex family dynamics in the room, and use empathy to explain a diagnosis.
Exactly. The execution of the task is automated, but the judgment, the context, and the meaning-making remain exclusively human. This raises an important question, though, a profound systemic challenge. What happens when the volume of necessary human labor drastically shrinks? For centuries, heavily influenced by things like the Protestant work ethic, modern society has intertwined human identity and worth directly with economic productivity.
Yeah, your job is who you are.
Exactly. What do you do for a living is the first question we ask. If automation handles the bulk of our productivity, we face a massive crisis of identity.
This is where O'Neill introduces what I think is honestly the most radical concept in the material: universal basic meaning. We debate universal basic income, or UBI, constantly, the idea of a financial safety net to keep people fed and housed in a post-labor economy.
Right.
But UBI only solves the physiological problem of survival. It completely ignores the psychological devastation of feeling useless.
If we successfully decouple survival from labor, we must actively design societal structures that decouple identity from labor. Universal basic meaning proposes that society has an obligation to architect avenues for people to feel significant, challenged, and connected outside of the economic engine.
What does that look like in practice?
This means radically rethinking urban design, funding for the arts, community mutual aid, like the free store we discussed earlier, and lifelong education that isn't just vocational training. We have to build infrastructure for human purpose. Otherwise, we will have a population that is financially sustained but psychologically hollow.
And while we are transitioning through this messy middle phase where humans and advanced AI are kind of working side by side, we are seeing a really dangerous pattern emerge regarding who takes the blame when systems fail. It's a phenomenon explored by AI researcher Madeline Claire Eilish, and she calls it the moral crumple zone.
It is a chillingly accurate metaphor. Think about the physical crumple zone engineered into the front of a car. It is designed to crush inward upon impact, absorbing the kinetic energy of the crash to protect the passengers inside the cabin. Eilish argues that in highly complex automated systems, humans are increasingly being positioned as the literal shock absorbers for technological failures.
Right, we put a human in the loop. A person monitoring the AI's output, ostensibly as a safety measure. But when the system inevitably malfunctions at a speed or complexity beyond human comprehension, the human operator is the one who absorbs the legal and moral liability. The system design is protected, the human takes the hit.
Historical examples of this are tragic. Look at the partial nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island in 1979, or the crash of Air France Flight 447 in 2009.
Yeah, talk about those.
In both of those catastrophic events, the underlying failure was actually in the UI, the user interface of the highly automated systems. The sensors threw up cascades of contradictory, poorly designed alerts. The systems fundamentally misrepresented what was happening physically to the reactor and to the aircraft.
So the human operators were just drowned in confusing data they had never been trained to interpret under that kind of stress.
Yes, and yet, the immediate official narratives and public blame fell squarely on human error. The pilots and the plant operators were scapegoated for reacting poorly to a fatally flawed technological design. They were the moral crumple zones for the engineers and corporations that built those systems.
We see a slightly less lethal but equally exploitative version of this in what O'Neill terms the inverse uncanny valley. We often assume systems are highly automated when, in reality, they are powered by unseen human drudgery.
Right.
The book uses a great pop culture reference for this, which I love. The movie phone Kramer episode of Seinfeld.
Oh, classic.
For anyone who hasn't seen it, Kramer rates a phone number that is one digit off from the automated movie Showtime hotline. People keep calling him expecting a machine. And instead of correcting them, Kramer tries to mimic the robotic voice, desperately flipping through the newspaper to find movie times, getting confused by the touch-tone beeps until he finally breaks character and just yells, "Why don't you just tell me what movie you'd like to see?"
It's a hilarious scene, but it perfectly mirrors the reality of modern AI development. Companies pitch these seamless, magical AI algorithms. But behind the curtain, there are thousands of underpaid gig workers in data centers, manually labeling images, moderating traumatic content, and transcribing audio to make the algorithm appear intelligent.
Wow, yeah.
Instead of technology elevating the human is reduced to a hidden mechanical cog servicing the illusion of the technology.
If humans are being utilized as physical shock absorbers and hidden cogs to prop up flawed systems, it demands a massive institutional response. We can't fix that with individual choices. Which brings us to the macro level of the deep dive: global ecosystems and institutional adaptation. Because none of these technologies exist in a vacuum. A corporation pushing a digital transformation in its supply chain to increase shipping efficiency directly alters the global climate footprint.
It is all inextricably linked. You cannot separate a tech company's data harvesting policy from global human rights or an algorithmic bias from social justice outcomes. And regarding our data, we are currently trapped in what scholar Shoshana Zuboff calls the dictatorship of no alternatives.
The illusion of consent.
Exactly.
We clip "I agree" on a 50-page terms of service agreement, not because we genuinely consent to having our behavioral data strip-mined and sold to data brokers, but because there is literally no alternative. If you want to apply for a job, or navigate a new city, or communicate with your child's school, you must participate in the digital ecosystem. You surrender your privacy as the mandatory toll to participate in modern society.
There is a growing movement arguing for individual data ownership, the idea that your data is a personal asset or civil right.
Yeah.
But individual friction isn't enough to reverse systemic inertia. You need institutional scale design changes. We're seeing early blueprints of this in urban planning, such as the concept of the 20-minute city.
Explain the mechanics of that, because it's a great example of multivariable optimization.
Right. So a 20-minute city is an urban planning framework where the geography and infrastructure are explicitly designed so that every resident can meet their essential daily needs: work, school, groceries, healthcare, recreation within a 20-minute walk or bicycle ride from their home. It is a system designed to optimize for multiple positive outcomes simultaneously. It drastically reduces carbon emissions by removing the need for daily car commutes. It improves public health through active transit, and it rebuilds local community cohesion. It aligns the physical infrastructure directly with human flourishing.
You see a similarly institutional ambition with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. It's an attempt to create a globally recognized, standardized framework for system-level optimization, giving nations and corporations a shared metric for things like clean water, gender equity, and responsible consumption. But for any of these institutional frameworks to function, there is one non-negotiable prerequisite, and that's trust.
And the data on trust is incredibly revealing right now. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer referenced in the text, business is currently the most trusted institution globally. It sits at 61% trust, outranking NGOs, government, and media.
Which is wild to think about, honestly. But it shifts the entire landscape of responsibility. If corporations hold the majority of the public's trust, the burden of ethical leadership falls squarely on corporate system design. The era of the CEO claiming, "we just build the platform, we aren't responsible for how it's used," is over.
Exactly. I mean, that is the crux of the issue.
Yeah.
If business is the most trusted institution, business leadership means accepting and sometimes actively championing regulation. The default corporate posture is to view regulation as red tape that throttles innovation.
Right.
But O'Neill frames regulation as a public good, When transnational tech companies operate with market caps and behavioral influence that dwarf sovereign nations, regulation is the only mechanism scaled to protect the public. It is the guardrail that keeps the system from driving off the cliff.
And we know that when institutions design the right guardrails and incentives, human behavior shifts in profound ways. Let's look at the psychology behind the IKEA live lagom study mentioned in the text. Lagom is a Swedish concept roughly translating to just the right amount. IKEA ran a project to see if they could encourage sustainable living among their customers.
The mechanism of change here is fascinating. It relies on what psychologists call cognitive dissonance and self-perception theory. IKEA found that when a consumer made a single, relatively minor sustainable purchase, like swapping out their old bulbs for simple LED lights, it triggered a positive spillover effect.
Because once they take that action, their internal narrative shifts. They subconsciously think, I'm the kind of person who cares about energy efficiency. And to maintain consistency with that new identity, they begin taking further actions they weren't explicitly prompted to do, like turning down their thermostat or wasting less food. It proves that micro-level system design making an LED bulb cheap and accessible can cascade into macro-level behavioral shifts.
We can also leverage emerging technologies to structurally enforce trust where institutions have historically failed. The text highlights a blockchain platform called Disburse. Historically, global humanitarian aid is plagued by a lack of transparency. Funds sent to developing nations are often heavily diluted by exorbitant bank transfer fees or lost entirely to corruption before they reach the intended project.
Right. But by utilizing a blockchain, a decentralized, immutable, cryptographic ledger, a UK charity was able to trace the flow of educational funding to a project in Swaziland in real time. The technology removes the need for blind trust in intermediaries. It proves that we can use complex computational systems not to harvest user data for ad targeting, but to solve institutional corruption and guarantee the delivery of resources. Here's where it gets really interesting. When you zoom out and look at all of this data privacy, algorithmic bias, the automation of meaning, there is a profound paradox at the center of it all. We are fighting desperately to protect our intimate, highly individualized human-scale lives from being exploited by faceless algorithms. But to save our individual privacy and autonomy, we actually have to rely on massive collective institutional regulation.
Right.
We cannot solve the crisis of the individual as individuals. We have to think and act at the absolute largest humanity scale in order to protect the fragile human scale.
That paradox is the defining challenge of our era. And it leads us to the ultimate synthesis of this entire analysis. If we have to think at a humanity scale, we have to ask, what is the crisis in perception here?
What is it?
The crisis in perception is that the vast majority of us believe the future is propelled by an autonomous, unstoppable wave of technological momentum. We view artificial intelligence, automation, and data harvesting as forces of nature. But the deeper structural reality is that technologies are meticulously, intentionally designed.
Yeah.
They relentlessly optimize for the specific incentives, the financial priorities, and the biases that human beings encode into them. What often appears to us as inevitable destiny is, in reality, the highly predictable outcome of system design. If an algorithm enrages society, it is because it was mathematically incentivized to optimize for engagement, and rage is the most efficient engagement tool. The crisis in perception is mistaking a designed output for unavoidable fate. Systems thinking reveals the empowering truth. Changing our future does not require stopping technology. It requires changing the fundamental targets our technological and economic systems are built to optimize.
If we want a future so bright, we have to demand systems that are explicitly engineered for meaning, equity, and human flourishing. Which brings me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over as we close out this deep dive. We've spent a lot of time discussing how corporate algorithms create filter bubbles, trapping us in echo chambers by feeding us content that perfectly aligns with our historical data. But let's apply some both-and thinking to O'Neill's premise.
Oh, interesting.
If we actually succeed in redesigning our technology to relentlessly optimize for meaning and purpose, do we risk creating a meaning bubble? If an ultra-advanced AI is constantly monitoring us, perfectly attuned to serving up exactly the type of work, community, and art that historically brings us comfort and purpose, how do we prevent humanity from getting trapped in an echo chamber of our past values? How do we ensure that in a perfectly optimized, frictionless world, we still encounter the friction, the discomfort, and the unknown that has always been required to evolve new definitions of what it means to be human? Crisis in perception is not about telling people what to think. It is about making the system shaping perception more visible. Because when structural forces remain hidden, meaningful change becomes far more difficult to imagine. Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.